career, their pension, their livelihood isn't dependent on pleasing the prime minister. It's dependent on following the civil service code and the law.
They are structurally insulated from partisan manipulation.
A politician can scream all they want, but if the civil servant says, I cannot legally execute this order, the politician's power is neutralized.
Precisely. The bureaucracy itself acts as a massive friction point against illegal action.
And the third guardrail takes that insulation to the highest level of state power, a professional, democratic military.
The text points out that unlike authoritarian regimes, where the military is basically the armed wing of a political party, the British armed forces swear allegiance to the crown.
They do not swear allegiance to a political party, and explicitly not to the prime minister.
I love this concept. Let me try to put this all together.
Go for it.
I'm imagining the UK political system like a modern deep-sea submarine.
Okay, I'm with you.
It is built with multiple independent watertight compartments.
Yeah.
You have the courts in one, the civil service in another, the military in another. Now, if one compartment floods, say a radical extremist politician manages to get elected and completely takes over the prime minister's office, the water can't spread and sink the whole ship.
Why? Because the bulkhead doors hold tight.
Yes. The rule of law, the nonpartisan civil service, the military's allegiance to the crown, they for the doors.
The radical can shout all they want in their flooded compartment, but they cannot legally order the military to act against citizens, and they cannot bypass the courts. The ship holds.
That is a brilliant way to visualize what political scientists call checks and balances. Dictatorships are single-hull ships. One breach, and the whole thing goes down.
Democracies are highly compartmentalized, and it highlights something we so often overlook.
The text challenges us to realize that the most boring bureaucratic parts of government are actually our biggest protectors.
The endless committee hearings, the civil service guidelines, the slow judicial reviews.
We naturally romanticize revolutionary leaders, but our day-to-day safety is secured by paperwork and civil servants refusing to break rules.
Thank God for the bureaucrats. Isn't exactly a catchy rally chant, but the text makes a compelling case that it is the absolute truth.
But let's push the boundary again. Institutions are, at the end of the day, just rules on paper and buildings made of stone.
Right, the people who make up the civil service are drawn from the public. So if the culture rots from the inside out, can the institutions really hold?
The text argues that the UK's societal demographics make 1930s-style isolation practically impossible today. We are looking at the fabric of society itself.
This is where the text moves from political architecture into pure demographics, and the data it presents is striking.
The author argues that the UK of today is fundamentally different from mid-century Europe. Ethnic and religious minorities are not isolated on the fringes of society.
They aren't living in segregated enclaves cut off from the majority. They are woven directly into the deepest levels of British institutional life.
The text notes there are around 90 members of parliament from minority ethnic backgrounds across all major parties.
Minorities are highly represented in the National Health Service, local councils, and the executive civil service.
This brings us to a concept the text calls public interconnectedness. Let's dive deep into this, because it explains the psychology of why genocide happens.
The text states that for true dehumanization to occur, the targeted group must be abstract.
They have to be an outgroup that is largely invisible to the majority in their daily lives. You have to convince the public that this group is a distant threat.
And the text argues that in modern Britain, that level of societal separation simply doesn't exist on a macro scale.
You cannot easily other a population when they are your neighbors, your colleagues, your friends.
If a radical politician stands on a stage and tells a British citizen that minorities are an existential threat, that citizen is going to experience massive cognitive dissonance.
Because that supposed threat is the doctor who just saved their mother in the NHS.
Or the teacher who educates their children, or the guy they play football with on the weekend.
Exactly. The societal separation needed to build a narrative of eradication hits a massive wall of daily reality.
You can't convince people to turn on a ghost if they are having tea with that person every Tuesday.
And the text points out that this interconnectedness isn't just passive, it is active and highly protective.
The author brings up the power of public backing, right?
Yes. The source notes that whenever far-right groups try to march or threaten local communities in the UK, the overwhelming response from the public is massive solidarity.
Multiracial, multi-faith counter-protests consistently vastly outnumber extremist groups.
You see interfaith solidarity from Christian, Jewish, and secular groups standing arm in arm alongside Muslim communities to protect places of worship.
The text identifies this not as a political anomaly, but as a direct reflection of mainstream British values.
Values that overwhelmingly favor fairness, community cohesion, and peace.
So we have built this massive picture over the last hour. We've looked at the extreme rhetoric, the massive institutional walls, and the deeply woven social fabric.
So what happens to a radical political movement when it hits all those walls?
When it realizes it can't hijack the state and it can't convince the public, according to the source, it doesn't gracefully concede defeat.
It splinters, it fractures, and it violently turns on itself.
This final section of the text is a really incisive look at modern political mechanics. It analyzes Musk's relationship with the broader UK populist right.
Specifically focusing on his interactions with Nigel Farage and the Reform UK Party.
Now, from a distance, one might assume that Musk, Robinson, and Farage are all perfectly aligned.
They all operate in right-wing populism, criticize immigration, and utilize anti-establishment rhetoric.
But the text reveals a deeply fractured reality. Musk actually actively opposes Farage.
Wait. If they generally want the exact same border policies, why are they fighting each other instead of the government?
Because of Tommy Robinson. The text details that Farage has consistently, purposefully distanced Reform UK from Robinson.
Farage views Robinson's movement as far too extreme.
He likely recognizes that fully associating with Robinson's street-level tactics would alienate the moderate electorate he needs to actually win seats in Parliament.
Farage is playing a pragmatic, long-term political game. He wants to govern.
But Musk, according to the text, absolutely hates this pragmatism. Musk's reaction is fascinating. He publicly repudiated Farage.
He took to X and called Farage's approach weak sauce.
He went so far as to actively call for Reform UK supporters to revolt and replace Farage as their leader.
And he didn't just attack Farage. He shifted his considerable digital backing toward much more fringe nationalist groups.
Specifically mentioning Advance UK, which is the party Tommy Robinson eventually joined.
Musk declared that these fringe groups would actually drive change where Farage would fail.
The text also details Musk calling for the literal dissolution of Parliament and heavily criticizing the Online Safety Act.
Let me make sure I'm getting this because the strategy here is just baffling.
Let's ask you, the listener, to analyze this move. By turning his massive digital influence against Farage, who is arguably the most established figure on the UK populist right in terms of getting votes.
Is Musk prioritizing ideological purity over actual, tangible political power?
That is the inescapable conclusion drawn from the text. By demanding total alignment with Robinson's extreme rhetoric, Musk is fracturing the very political base that would theoretically push for the policies he wants.
It's like a sports team owner firing his star quarterback right before the playoffs, simply because the quarterback refuses to wear the owner's favorite brand of shoes.
The owner is actively sabotaging his own team's momentum and their chance at winning, all for the sake of an alliance with one specific extreme figure who isn't even on the roster.
It shows that algorithmic populism isn't always about winning elections or passing laws. Sometimes it's just about winning the narrative war on the timeline.
Regardless of the real-world political cost.
It perfectly highlights the chaotic, unpredictable nature of billionaire-driven digital populism. It doesn't adhere to traditional party discipline.
It is driven by personal alliances, digital engagement metrics, and a demand for absolute, unfiltered adherence to an extreme narrative.
Even if that narrative completely shatters the political vehicle needed to enact change in the real world.
So let's bring all these incredible threads together for you. We started by exploring the stark reality of extreme anti-Muslim rhetoric and the terrifying algorithmic amplification of division.
We unpack the paradox of their ideology, contrasting their anti-state libertarianism with the totalitarian, state-engineered horror of the CCP model.
We walked through the deep structural differences between 1930s Germany and modern Britain, unpacking exactly why experts agree that the UK's rigid institutional guardrails act as watertight compartments.
Preventing a slide into state-sponsored genocide.
And we explored how a deeply integrated multi-ethnic society creates a massive, almost impenetrable barrier to dehumanization.
Finally, we saw how this unyielding institutional and societal resistance causes radical movements to fracture and cannibalize themselves.
If there is a core takeaway from Mohammed Abdullah's source text, it is this. The safety of communities in the UK doesn't depend on shifting political moods or the erratic endorsements of tech billionaires.
It is secured by a rock-solid network of independent laws, a bureaucracy that answers to the rule